Thank you for joining us, both of you. So I first wrote about non-traditional students in probably around 1998, and it was at the time 25% of students were what we think of as traditional college students. That's now just 15% in 2015. So let's just talk about sort of what the parameters are. How are we now defining non-traditional students? Elo, you talked about when we were on the phone about stranded workers, which I thought was, I've never heard that phrase before. So can you tell us about that and maybe sort of other, how we're defining our terms now?
Sure. So if you think about it, the economy has changed so much. Is now nearly every employer creating any new job is requiring some sort of post-secondary credential. So we have an entire population in California, nearly 8 million, over 8 million individuals who are in the workforce but only have a high school diploma or some college but no credential. Those are non-traditional learners. Those are individuals who are stranded, who are stuck in the workforce, who don't have any real opportunity to have wage gain, promotional opportunities, unless they get some sort of credential. So that's why we now look at them as students. These are individuals who need learning and certification and credentialing. So those are our students. And I guess you would consider them non-traditional, although pretty soon they'll be just as traditional as everybody else.
Right, exactly. Wes, what would you say we're looking at?
And I agree, and if anything, they already are. They really are the traditional students already.
Right.
And oftentimes when you look at the frame, we're talking about students who college wasn't made for them. Right? Because I think we have to be honest about the fact that when higher ed was created, higher ed was made for 15 to 20% of the population.
Right.
Higher ed wasn't made for everybody. Higher ed was made for a sliver of the population who was supposed to attend these schools. Everybody else was not. And so the non-traditional students that we're talking about now, we're really talking about students that college was never made for you.
Right.
And so as we're having this conversation about how do we then adjust colleges, that the idea of access to students is important, but it's not just going to be about access, because the framing of the college was never made for those students in the first place.
So the issues are certainly affordability, completion, right? I think completion is obviously an issue for all colleges, all kinds of students, but I would think particularly for this cohort, if we want to call it that.
Yeah, well, I think completion becomes and I think this is also how do we distinguish between means and ends, right? Because I think completion needs to become the larger ends that we have for all of our students. But when we're talking about the means, we are talking about how we're addressing areas of affordability. How are we understanding the fact that we're watching wages stay relatively flat, we're watching college tuitions continue to rise, and we're watching that divide take place, right? We're talking about the fact that when we're talking about accessibility, that it's not just tuition, but it's cost of attendance.
Right.
It's about the fact that what is it going to cost to live? What is it going to cost to eat? What is it going to cost to have all the other things that factor into it? It's also talking about what are we doing when we're thinking about the academic preparation for students who are coming on board. So the ends becomes the completion, but there are many variables that determine the means that make completion a reality or not.
So can you tell us about the ASAP program, or ASIP? I don't know how you this is a CUNY program, correct?
Correct.
And this was aimed at helping New York City students?
Correct.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Robinhood, and Robinhood helped to create and fund a platform program called ASAP. And really what ASAP looks to do, it's address the idea that it's not just going to be about the tuition oftentimes that's going to keep a student from being able to complete. It's also some of the other factors, the other financial factors. Sarah did a great job earlier talking about this idea about the food insecurity for many students. And it's also things like in New York City, our subway system, people use things like called Metro cards. Our students, if they don't have Metro cards, how are they able to then go from where they live? And again, when you're watching the rising costs of living, more students are getting pushed further and further out. So if you have students getting pushed further and further out, how are they then getting to the institution of higher education? It's also thinking about things like, oftentimes when people talk about internships and that type of, platform, which are really important for students. But the truth is, if I'm a student who is an under-resourced student, an internship sounds great to me. But if I have any free time, I'm getting more hours at my job.
Right. Right.
And so it's all these other factors that play into why completion matters and what is the point of the completion that ASAP really has a core focus on. And what ASAP has done in a relatively short period of time, it's not only doubled the rate of graduation for the students that are inside of the ASAP platform in the community system, but it's also now being adopted across a larger city platform because we believe, and part of the role of foundations in our opinion, is how are we using our capital to essentially de-risk? How are we using our capital to put towards things that have the potential for growth and expansion? And then how are we then presenting the options to the largest expender of all, which is our government?
Right.
And then how do we use them to be able to make sure these type of platforms that are working are then accessible to a larger population?
Right. And so, Eli, what are the issues in California, and what is California doing about this question of stranded workers and this micro-credentialing? Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, the California community colleges, we have 114 colleges serving well over 2 million students. Nearly 1 out of every 4 community college students in the nation is a California community college student. So this is a huge issue for us because while we have focused on this traditional, what we consider a traditional pipeline, along the way, we have moved the goalpost. There was a time, not too long ago, where a high school diploma was the default to get into the workforce. We've moved that goalpost. Of course, the same time that now the workforce is primarily, particularly in California, individuals of color. And these are the least likely to have had success in higher education. So from the community college perspective, it is all about social and economic mobility for all Californians. And a key to that is some sort of post-secondary credential. It is not a privilege, it is a necessity. And for the state of California to remain competitive, we have to do a better job of making that happen. So we're focused on not only identifying these stranded workers, educating policymakers about the need, trying to ensure that our state understands that if we don't move and adapt, our state is going to fall further and further behind. And we see that every day from the coast to the inland valley. The middle class is being gutted in California, and that's true across the nation. So I firmly believe that it is the community colleges that are in the best space to deal with this issue. And so rather than funding them the least per student, we should be funding them the most per student, particularly at this point in time. And that goes for all broad access colleges and universities, including the Cal State system, the SUNY system, that really deals with the most vulnerable populations and creates the most value.
And the governor has in his budget, can you talk about that, this program,
Yes.
this online?
So in the governor's budget, which we are coming down to the last few days of, there is a proposal to create the 115th California Community Colleges, which is a fully online, tech-enabled college focused on micro-credentialing. We have several partners here today, partners like Burning Glass, who are helping us really identify and understand what are the key skills for particular job classifications. And so we want to develop a system where we can reach these individuals where they're at. We're partnering with some of the larger employers, some of the larger labor organizations to really target these vulnerable populations who really have nowhere to go unless we can get education attainment to them in a way that works for them. So we're focused on a competency-based education model and ensuring that they're gaining the skills and credentials necessary to have that additional wage gain. Now, we recognize that these should not and cannot be terminal credentials, but we're trying to deal with a fast-moving economy, and we need to ensure that these individuals have some economic security. Otherwise, their children who are coming through our pipeline are not going to have.
And when you say not
economic
terminal,
security.
you mean that these people can be able to
Yes.
pile up credits and get...
They should be able to continue to pile up those credits, those competencies, and they should lead to a higher level credential. We want them all to achieve a higher level credential. But when you're working, all day long, 2 and 3 jobs, it's very difficult to just drop everything that you're doing, attend one of our community colleges, wait 3 or 4 years, and then get your credential.
So these are some of the challenges, and I do feel like this topic is often approached as if it's some sort of crisis that we're dealing with, and again, there are challenges. But what are the opportunities here? We've talked a lot last night and already this morning about the importance of diversity of perspectives and tolerating other perspectives on campus. So tell us what non-traditional students can offer campuses that maybe don't have as many of them now.
Well, I think, first of all, non-traditional students help our faculty better understand what is happening in their communities, in society, in the workforce. those of us who are educators are sometimes too far detached from what is really going on. We have the luxury of having things like tenure or full benefits, retirement. These are things that are foreign to most people in communities these days. So we have become somewhat detached from what is really going on in the workforce, from what is really going on in society. And I think having these students interact with our faculty, with our staff, with our administrators, helps us reconnect to what is really going on and how can we really improve society.
Right, and Wes, I know you're very passionate about the idea of bringing vets on campus in particular. So tell us about that, what you think that's, what perspective that can offer.
Absolutely, and first, also, the reason why I also think it's important is simply because we're talking about the majority of our population here.
Right.
So you cannot have a conversation about the future of our society if only a sliver of the population is part of that conversation. And you cannot have an honest conversation about the future of our society if a sliver of the population is being thought about, right? So if you're serious about the future of our economy, if you're serious about the future of our communities, if you're serious about the future of our society, then it's about increasing access for the majority of our population. The vets is a really important space, and part of the reason I think why I'm so passionate about this is because it is personal. I joined the military right out of high school. I went to a 2-year school. I received my associate's degree, and the Army helped to pay for that. The Army also helped to pay for me to transfer over to Johns Hopkins, where I received my bachelor's degree.
But did your credits transfer? My understanding is they.
That's
right.
exactly
Sorry,
right.
Sorry for.
That's where we were going. Yes. But that's a really, really important point, right? Because I think there's two things when we're talking about the veterans community that we have to remember, and one of them is the importance of scaffolding. The other is the importance of policy, right? Because as I transferred over, all my credits did not transfer. As and again, whether I was taking biology in one place or biology in another place, with all due respect, biology is biology. I mean, seriously. But not according to my next university, which then made me pay for it again. And in addition to the fact that I also then transferred to a university that had what they called a residency requirement for graduation. It's the amount of time that you are on campus to graduate. So therefore, if you were certain credits shy, or even if you come in with transferable credits, you have to stay on campus a certain amount of time to consider yourself a graduate. That's a tuition hike. That's what it is. These are policies. And so I think it's really important to think about how are we talking about credits, credentialing, and transferring of skills. If we have people who are coming back, and this is where, and I'll say real quick about the skill set. It is really important also to take away certain skill sets that people are taking from professional experiences and think about how can we then incorporate that into academic credentialing. If a person has a certain experience in certain areas, that should then have some form of transferable qualification and credentialing. But also, I think what becomes really important for universities to remember is the academic sustainability and preparation for our veterans also does become important. And I say this with all honesty and all love, that some of the people who I served with in Afghanistan, some of the people, we're both members of the 82nd Airborne Division, some of the people who I served with were genius people, book smart, all this kind of stuff. And some of the people I served with made it through high school kicking and screaming. And they then decided to join the military after their time in high school. I'm just being very honest and very frank when I say, for the people who did make it out of high school kicking and screaming, just because they now have 3 or 4 deployments under their belt does not mean they are any more college ready academically than they were finishing high school. And so we have to make sure that the supports that are being put in place, that it's not simply about, okay, how do we provide a post 9/11 GI Bill, which is an incredible bill, and I'm really glad we have it in place and we have to protect it. But it's also about how are we making sure the academic supports are in place for students who maybe academics wasn't always their thing. And that's okay.
But then do we have to look at remedial education as a hurdle for them because they're going to have to pay for that credit, or?
Yes, but I think in many ways we do it already.
Right.
Right? I mean, I take a look at even the framework that we have for our service academies, right? West Point has something called West Point Prep. The Naval Academy has something called NAPS, which is the Naval Academy Preparatory School. And that's just simply
It's actually NAPS?
It actually is, the acronym is NAPS, even though, it used to mean something to me. But the thing about it is what it basically is. It's a time period for people to better prepare for their experience at West Point. It's a time for people to better prepare for their experience at the Naval Academy, or whatever the case might be. So we have a precedent in how exactly to prepare students for what we know could be an interesting and a complicated potential transition. And so that relationship that institutions of higher education have with the military, with the system, both the DoD and also with the VA, about how are we making sure that when a student when a student is returning from a deployment, and they are by definition a non-traditional student, that we simply think that just because we gave them a post 9/11 GI Bill, that somehow that's enough, or somehow we've done our part, if the goal is actually thinking about long-term completion and long-term accessibility.
So I'm going to go to questions from the audience in a minute, so please ask your questions, submit them online, or feel free to raise your hand in a minute. But what, it always seems like there's a divide here in the conversation between what we think of as elite schools and maybe schools that serve, I don't know, serve everyone, for lack of a more efficient
Hey, we're
phrase.
proud to serve the top 100% of students.
Exactly, right. So,
That's the way we should all be.
Well said, well said.
what can and should elite schools be doing to serve a more non-traditional population, if that's what they want to do, and maybe make the argument for why they want to do that?
So, I mean, I think there's been a lot of this discussion lately. I think Yale certainly has come out and really made a valiant effort at trying to attract more underrepresented students. But the reality is we need to quit talking about elite institutions, start talking about broad access, great university systems and college systems like we have in New York and California and Illinois and throughout the country. That is where value is being created. I think, I lean on the Chetty and Freeman work that really shows those colleges that are having the greatest impact on society are the ones that move individuals from one rung of the economic ladder to a very different rung. That's what makes America great. And so I think we need to put the focus every single day on those universities that are the gateway to students of color, to low-income students, that are providing real economic mobility. Yes, I think we can and should continue to focus on Ivy League schools to admit more people that look like what America looks like. But the reality is we're not going to make an impact that way, okay? I come from Long Beach, California. Long Beach State conferred 11,000 degrees. Wow. More Pell-eligible students than the entire Ivy League. That is value. And if we can focus on that, I think we'll be in much better shape as a country.
Right.
And the only thing I'd add is that for the elite schools, I think they need to do a better job of increasing seats and access for transfer students. I think it's not just simply going to be about the students who are coming from high school, but we have to increase access for students who are coming from community college and non-traditional schools.
Right.
I also think there needs to be a more clear and direct focus on social capital and social capital building. Because oftentimes we look at these things in phases where, if a student can attend even if regardless if they come from a vulnerable community, and if we can get them to attend a high school that can put them on the path to higher education, and we can infuse that, but once they pass on to higher education, if that continuation and the compounding of social capital doesn't exist, then we will then find themselves with a lot of broken promises. Right. And so one of the benefits and one of the things that people who are not necessarily from vulnerable communities or vulnerable environments, one of the inherent benefits that they have is inherent social capital. They can make phone calls, they can make emails, their parents can do all these kind of things. And so I think that if that's not naturally there for our most vulnerable, then we have to do a better job of creating it and sustaining it.
Right. Okay, we're going to go to questions. I think they're going to bring up the lights again, I think. Does anybody have a hand up? Okay, right here.
Thank you. Great discussion. Ramesh Qureshi, Portland State University. I'd like to know what has been challenges and also best practices that you have seen in terms of integrating non-traditional and Z generation students in the same classroom.
Well, I mean, for community colleges, that happens every single day. That is not anything new in community colleges. That is every classroom in a community college. 18-year-olds coming right out of high school and 30-year-olds who have been displaced because of job losses in the economy. I think that is a very healthy thing. I think our students are better for it. They get to experience both diversity of experience, young and old, veterans, those who are coming from different rungs of the social and economic ladder. I think that is a very healthy thing. So I think the challenge we have is obviously for a faculty member really understanding the individual needs and the starting places for all those different students. And so we're spending a lot of time and effort to improve our ability to gather data, to really allow faculty to have a much better idea of where each student is at. I think that is something we need to continue to do.
Anybody else? Yeah, right here. You. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. We'll come back to you.
Thank you. Donna Linderman, City University of New York. I oversee
Hi.
the ASAP program. Eloy and
Yes.
thank you so much for the support from Robin Hood and also for the amazing work you're doing in California, Eloy. I actually have a question for both of you, which piggybacks on what you mentioned, Eloy, about how can we help more public funders, policymakers, and to increase in the philanthropy sector the importance of investing in the necessary infrastructure at our public institutions to provide the level of support that students need that you guys have talked about and that we deliver every day with our ASAP program. Not just the free tuition, but the infrastructure that students need in their pockets and that the colleges need to deliver the work that's necessary to fully support students to graduate and be successful.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, this is a big question, and I think, people like Sarah have pointed out the real needs of students, and that is multiplied manyfold at the community college level. We have to do a much better job in the infrastructure. These are individuals who have now the direct need to get a college credential, otherwise they cannot participate in the economy. At the same time, we're devastating safety nets. We're gutting middle-class jobs. So we really need to think about the entire social network around these students and invest in communities so that communities can own every single student in that community and really work with them. I think the best solutions that I've seen, my experience in Long Beach with the Long Beach College Promise, what I've seen in other communities where they rally around students like you're doing with the ASAP program. I think that understanding that it takes every member of the community to support a child to get from point A to point B is necessary. It cannot just fall on the community college.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I would add, I think, and also the unique role that whether it be private sector or philanthropy in particular can play in this is we have to remember the unique nature of the seats that we sit in and be willing to actually push them, right? Because the truth is that we can do things and we can fund things that oftentimes our government partners, it might be for them a little bit too risky at first. That's fine. That's what we're supposed to be doing, is actually going out there and actually de-risking things to show what can work and then present them to our government partners to say that here's what we were able to do with X investment. Imagine what you could do with Y. Because their budgets are really where you're going to find that much larger scale. I think the other thing that philanthropy can and should do is philanthropy has to remember that our power is not just in our purse, our power is in our voice. Our power is in our ability to actually take the data and take the information and take the best practices and use it for measures of advocacy and use it for measures of pushing and pulling to make sure that policies better reflect ways we're going to support our most vulnerable. I think oftentimes, philanthropy, has been okay with simply being the funder without understanding maybe the strongest muscle that we have is one that we have to be unafraid to use a little bit more often.
Okay, we have 4 seconds. I don't know if we should. All right, well, okay, the mic's being handed, so let's hear your question. Thank you.
Oh, I was taking it back.
Oh. All right, I'm going to let the mic be our cue. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions.